On December 7, 1941, the world watched Japanese aircraft deliver a blow that shattered illusions of Western air power. By then, Japan had built a fighting force feared from Pearl Harbor to the jungles of Burma. Planes like the Zero, so advanced they seemed unstoppable. But years later, this same arsenal was burning in flames, outgunned and outnumbered. How did every Japanese aircraft, from legendary fighters to desperate kamikaze designs, shape victory, defeat, and the fate of thousands? The answer begins in the skies right before the war. Japanese engineers spent the late 1930s racing to create fighters that could dominate the vast skies of Asia and the Pacific. The result was the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, a machine that stunned every Allied pilot who faced it. With a combat range of over 1,130 kilometers, the Zero could escort bombers farther than any American or British fighter in 1941. Its secret lay in extreme lightness. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and a structure so delicate that even a single bullet could ignite its tanks. But in the hands of experienced pilots, the Zero's agility was unmatched. Early in the war, Allied flyers learned the hard way: dogfight a Zero and you would likely never return. The Imperial Japanese Army had its own answer: the Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, codenamed Oscar by Allied intelligence. Like the Zero, the Oscar was built for range and nimbleness, not protection. It ruled the skies over China and Southeast Asia, twisting through turns that left Hurricanes and P-40s struggling to keep up. Yet both fighters shared a flaw: their pilots were dangerously exposed. Allied codebreakers, overwhelmed by Japanese type numbers, began assigning simple names: male for fighters and female for bombers. Zeke for the Zero, Oscar for the Ki-43. These code names soon filled Allied reports and cockpit briefings, turning confusion into clarity. Stories of Japanese aces became legend. Saburo Sakai, flying a Zero over Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942, was shot through the head, blinded in one eye, blood pouring from his wounds. He flew his crippled plane nearly 5 hours back to base, a feat that echoed across both sides of the Pacific. But as Japan's best pilots fell, the edge these remarkable fighters gave began to slip away. By 1944, Japan's quest for aerial supremacy had become a race against time and resources. The Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, known as Frank, stood out as a rare match for Allied fighters. With a top speed near 624 kilometers per hour and armed with 4 cannons, it could climb to B-29 superfortress altitudes and, on paper, duel with P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts. Yet most Ki-84s flew with derated engines and poor fuel, leaving many grounded or unreliable in combat. Of the roughly 3,500 built, few ever fought at full strength. Desperation forced innovation. When factories could not supply enough inline engines for the Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien, engineers swapped in radial Mitsubishi Ha-112 Ohka 2 engines, creating the Ki-100. This conversion, completed in early 1945, produced a nimble, forgiving interceptor praised by both Japanese and Allied pilots. But only about 390 Ki-100 fighters reached the front, too late to stem the tide. The Navy fielded its own high-altitude hunters. The Kawanishi N1K Shiden Kai, known as George, boasted 4 20mm cannons and superb maneuverability. Elite squadrons like the 343rd Kokutai scored impressive victories, but production bottlenecks and unreliable Homare engines meant most units never saw enough airworthy aircraft. The Mitsubishi J4M Raiden, called Jack, was built for speed and climb, designed to intercept B-29 superfortress raids with heavy cannon fire. Engine troubles and limited numbers kept its impact largely local. Japan's last hope for a true Zero successor was the Mitsubishi A6M Repu, called SAM. Superior in many ways, it first flew in 1944, but bombing raids and engine shortages left only a handful completed. These late warfighters represented technical leaps. Fast, powerful, and heavily armed. But with fuel in short supply, factories in ruins, and the skies filled with Allied bombers, even the best machines could not turn the tide. The gap between design and battlefield reality grew wider as Japan's industrial base crumbled. Japanese bombers were built for reach, not resilience. The Mitsubishi G4M, known to Allied crews as the Betty, could fly over 2,000 miles without refueling, a feat unmatched by any Western twin-engine bomber in 1941. That range came at a price. Designers stripped away armor and self-sealing fuel tanks to save weight, leaving the Betty's crew exposed. Allied pilots called it the flying lighter. One burst of gunfire could turn a G4M into a fireball. Even so, the Betty was central to Japan's early victories, launching torpedoes at ships from Malaya to the Solomons. On April 18, 1943, a pair of Bettys carried Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto on an inspection flight over Bougainville. American P-38s, guided by intercepted radio traffic, intercepted the formation. Yamamoto's bomber went down in flames, the loss rippling through the Japanese command. Earlier bombers like the Mitsubishi G4M shared the same philosophy: long, thin wings for range and almost no protection. G4Ms helped sink HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, proving that air power alone could destroy capital ships at sea. The Army's Mitsubishi Ki-81 Sally and its successor, the Nakajima Ki-43 Helen, added some armor and heavier guns, but remained vulnerable. Crews flew missions over China, Burma, and the Pacific, often facing mounting losses as Allied fighters closed the gap. The Yokosuka P1Y Francis tried to outrun danger with speed, but few made it home from late war sorties. As the Allies gained air superiority, Japanese bombers became easy targets, their early strengths now fatal weaknesses. The quest for range had left them defenseless in the face of relentless opposition. Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata led his torpedo squadron into Pearl Harbor at mast height, guiding Nakajima B-5N Kate bombers straight toward Battleship Row. Each Kate carried a single Type 90 WWII torpedo, dropped at just the right angle to skip under the anti-torpedo nets. Murata's attack crippled the USS West Virginia and the USS Oklahoma in minutes. The precision and discipline of that first wave set the gold standard for carrier air power, coordinated and devastating. HED-3. Aval dive bombers followed, their fixed landing gear and shrieking dives marking the second act. With practiced accuracy, Val pilots released 250-kilogram bombs from steep angles, striking battleships and cruisers with blows that echoed across the Pacific. At Coral Sea, Midway, and the Indian Ocean, Vals and Kates worked in tandem, sinking more Allied warships than any other Axis aircraft. Torpedo runs demanded nerves of steel. Pilots flew straight into anti-aircraft fire, releasing at the last possible moment. Dive bombers needed split-second timing to pull out from near-suicidal descents. Yokosuka D4Y Judy and Aichi B7. A grace appeared as the war dragged on, faster and more versatile, but arriving too late and in too few numbers to reverse Japan's fortunes. By 1944, new Nakajima B6N Jill torpedo bombers replaced the Kates, but American radar, fighters, and flak-shredded attack formations before they could strike. Murata himself was lost at Santa Cruz in October 1942, leading another torpedo run. His death symbolized the fate of Japan's carrier air arm, unmatched skill and courage, ground down by attrition and the rising tide of Allied power. The need for better reconnaissance and new tactics became urgent as carrier raids turned into desperate last stands. Japanese commanders depended on fast, far-seeing aircraft to map enemy movements across the Pacific's enormous distances. The Mitsubishi Ki-46, known as the Dyna, became their high-altitude scout. With a top speed over 600 kilometers per hour and a ceiling above 11,000 meters, It slipped past Allied fighters for much of the war, photographing bases from India to the Solomons. Its cameras brought back the intelligence that shaped every major campaign, extending Japan's vision. Surprise could come from below the waves, too. In September 1942, a tiny Yokosuka E-14Y floatplane codenamed Glenn launched from submarine Y-25 off the coast of Oregon. Piloted by Nobuo Fujita, it dropped 2 incendiary bombs into the forest near Mount Emily, the only Axis air raid on the American mainland. The fires fizzled, but the raid proved Japan could strike where no one expected. For long-range patrols, the Kawanishi H-8K Emily dominated the ocean. Heavily armed and nearly invulnerable to early Allied fighters, it ranged over 7,000 kilometers, scouting fleets and bombing distant islands. Meanwhile, the Nakajima J1N Gecko, originally an escort, was refitted as a night fighter. Its upward-firing cannons made it one of the few Japanese aircraft to bring down B-29s in the darkness over Japan. Each of these machines extended Japan's vision, but as resources dwindled, even the best eyes could not change the outcome. Training fields once filled with the hum of engines fell silent as fuel ran dry and instructors vanished to the front. By 1945, some new pilots received less than 100 hours in the cockpit, barely enough to master takeoff, let alone combat. The collapse of training became a fatal reality. Faced with Allied fleets off Okinawa, Japan gambled on weapons born of desperation. The Yokosuka Ohka was a rocket-propelled bomb piloted by a volunteer. It was carried beneath lumbering Betty bombers. Released within sight of the enemy, the Ohka's rockets igniting and sending it plunging towards ships at speeds that made interception nearly impossible. Yet for every destroyer struck, dozens of Bettys and their crews vanished in flames before an Ohka could be launched. Out of nearly 900 sorties, only 1 warship was sunk. On the ground, young men of the Thunder God's Corps wrote farewell letters. One wrote that if his body can stop one ship, then his life is not wasted. Some letters were defiant, others quietly afraid. In the sky, pilots like Isamu Kashid rammed B-29 bombers head-on, wings shearing through aluminum at closing speeds of over 500 kilometers per hour. These acts, both calculated and desperate, could not stem the tide. Even as jet prototypes like the Nakajima Ki-84 lifted off for test flights in August 1945, Japan's airfields were littered with unfinished dreams. The final months saw technology and sacrifice intertwined, but neither could alter the war's end. Today, preserved Japanese warplanes stand silent in museums, their innovations studied by new generations of engineers and pilots. As AIR power defines modern conflict, the lessons of rapid advances and costly miscalculations echo on. History's blueprints warn that technology races ahead, but consequences always arrive. Thanks for watching,